The moment Caroline walked into my kitchen that morning, she expected to see her weary old mother quietly making oatmeal. Instead, she stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes darted to the man in a tailored gray suit seated at the table, his briefcase open, a stack of freshly prepared legal documents neatly laid out in front of him. "Mother, what's happening?" she whispered, her face paling. I didn't rush to answer. Instead, I let her see me, dressed not in my usual sweater and slippers, but in my best navy suit, pearls around my neck, my posture straight, my gaze steady. The night before, I had listened to her careless audio message, the one she meant for Kevin. Each word had cut me deeper than the last. Once she gets too weak, we'll sell the house. It'll cover the debts and finally give us the life we deserve. She won't even notice. It's not like she can stop us. She thought I was frail. She thought I was easy prey. But what Caroline had forgotten was that I had built this house with my own 2 hands, sacrificed my youth for her future, and survived storms she couldn't even imagine. My heart was broken, yes, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. And that morning, when the lawyer Samuel Carter cleared his throat and slid the first document toward her, Caroline realized for the first time that her mother was not the victim in this story. When my husband David died 27 years ago, I wasn't just a widow. I was a single mother with a 3-year-old daughter and a half-finished house. The house had been our dream. David and I had purchased the land on the outskirts of Columbus when we were barely more than newlyweds. Every weekend for 2 years, we'd drive out to that plot, unfold our blueprints on the hood of our old Buick, and imagine the life we would build there. We'd planned everything. The wraparound porch where we'd watch sunsets, the kitchen with the island where our children would do homework, the garden where David would grow tomatoes. That would make the neighbors jealous. When he died, a sudden heart attack at 34, the foundation had been poured, the frame erected, but the walls were bare, and the roof was incomplete. The contractor suggested I sell it as is. "It's too much for a woman alone," he'd said, not unkindly. The bank agreed, urging me to cut my losses, but I couldn't let go of our dream. Not like that. I moved, Caroline and me, into a tiny apartment and took on 2 jobs. Receptionist by day, waitress by night. Every spare dollar went into that house. And every spare moment I was there, learning to do what I could myself. I painted walls. I laid tile. I sanded floors until my hands blistered and bled. "Why don't you just sell it, Helen?" my sister Jean would ask, watching me bandage my raw palms. Use the money to give Caroline a proper childhood. But the house was Caroline's childhood. On weekends, she'd toddle around the unfinished rooms, her little voice echoing in the empty spaces. "Daddy's house," she called it. Even at 3, she understood this was sacred ground. It took 7 years to finish what should have taken 1. 7 years of pinching pennies, of saying no to new clothes for me so Caroline could have her dance lessons. 7 years of falling asleep with sawdust in my hair and paint under my fingernails. But we did it. We moved in on Caroline's 10th birthday. "This is your legacy," I told her that night as we sat on the porch swing, looking at the stars. "Your father started it and I finished it, but one day it will be yours." She'd leaned her head against my shoulder. Then, her hair smelling of birthday cake. "I'll never sell it, Mom. Not ever. I promise." How easily children make promises they don't understand. For 15 years after that, the house was our sanctuary. It was where Caroline studied for her SATs, where she got ready for prom, where she cried when her first boyfriend broke her heart. It was where I taught her to make David's favorite chicken pot pie, and where we'd stay up late watching old movies when she came home from college on breaks. When she brought Kevin home for the first time, I noticed how his eyes darted around the living room, assessing, calculating. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he'd said, running his fingers along the crown molding I'd installed myself. "Must be worth a fortune these days." I'd smiled politely. "It's not about the worth. It's about the memories." He'd nodded, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the look of a man who converts everything to numbers. After they married, they visited every Sunday for dinner. I'd prepare David's recipes, and we'd eat at the table I'd refinished by hand. As the years passed, I noticed their questions shifting. It started innocently enough. "Mom, have you thought about downsizing? This place is so much work for you. Have you had the property appraised recently? Just out of curiosity. This neighborhood has really become desirable. The Wilsons sold their place for a fortune." I deflected each time, changing the subject to Caroline's job or Kevin's golf game. But the questions persisted, growing more frequent, more pointed. Then came my 65th birthday. I'd been feeling tired, not unusual for a woman my age who still worked part-time at the library and tended a large garden, but Caroline began to use that fatigue against me. Mom, I noticed you forgot where you put your reading glasses again. Mom, you seem a little confused about the day of the week. Little comments dropped like breadcrumbs, creating a trail to a conclusion she wanted others to reach, that Helen Dawson was losing her grip. I wasn't. My mind was as sharp as ever, but I began to notice other changes. Mail that went missing, phone calls that came in but weren't relayed to me, neighbors who looked at me with concern, as if they'd heard something troubling. And then, 6 months ago, Caroline and Kevin's apartment flooded. Just temporarily, they said as they moved into my guest rooms. Until the repairs are done. The repairs never seemed to finish. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. And slowly, I felt myself being edged out of my own life. Kevin complained about the temperature, so they took control of the thermostat. Caroline insisted my cooking was too heavy, so she took over meal planning. They handled my mail, answered my phone, and spoke to repair people without consulting me. I felt like a guest in the house I had built with my own hands. Still, I told myself they meant well. That Caroline was just worried about her aging mother. That Kevin's tendency to check my bank statements was just his way of helping. I made excuses for them because that's what mothers do. We see the best in our children, even when the evidence points elsewhere. Until last night. Until that message. I'd been in bed reading when my phone chimed. A voice message from Caroline, but it was clearly meant for Kevin. I almost didn't listen. Almost hit delete out of respect for her privacy. I wish I had. Once she gets too weak, we'll sell the house. It'll cover the debts and finally give us the life we deserve. She won't even notice. It's not like she can stop us. Her voice was so cold, so calculating, so unlike the daughter I thought I knew. In those few seconds, everything changed. The veil lifted, and I saw with painful clarity what had been happening all along. They weren't protecting me. They were positioning themselves. Each confused moment they'd pointed out, each conversation they'd had with my doctor behind my back, each legal document they'd encouraged me to sign, it was all building toward one goal, taking control of my house. The house that David and I had dreamed of, the house I had finished with my own 2 hands, the house I had promised would be Caroline's legacy, not her windfall. I set my phone down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling for hours, tears sliding silently into my hair. But as the night deepened, something else stirred within me, something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. By dawn, I knew exactly what I had to do. And it started with a phone call to Samuel Carter, the attorney who had handled David's estate all those years ago. The attorney who had warned me, gently but firmly, that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we love most. "Samuel, it's Helen Dawson," I said, when he answered his office phone at precisely 8 a.m. "I need your help. Today." There must have been something in my voice. A quiet desperation, perhaps. Because Samuel, who normally scheduled appointments weeks in advance, said simply, "I'll be there at 9. I hung up, took a deep breath, and walked to my closet. Behind my everyday clothes, the comfortable slacks and loose sweaters that Caroline I had begun to suggest were all you need at your age, Mom, hung the navy suit I'd worn to her college graduation. I slipped it on, fastened my strand of pearls around my neck, and applied lipstick for the first time in months. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like the confused old lady Caroline had been describing to neighbors, doctors, and bank managers. She looked like what she was: a homeowner, a retired librarian, a woman of dignity and agency. By 8:45, I had coffee brewing and my important papers spread across the kitchen table. Deed to the house, bank statements, power of attorney documents that Caroline had helped me sign, medical records. I heard Caroline's alarm go off upstairs at 8:50, exactly as it did every morning. She would shower, dress, and be down by 9:15. Kevin had left early for a golf game, which was perfect. I wanted to face my daughter alone first. Samuel arrived at 9 sharp, his leather briefcase in hand, his expression grave but kind. I'd known him for decades. He'd been a young associate when David died, and now his hair was silver, his face lined with experience. He'd helped me through the darkest period of my life once before. Now I needed him. Again. "Tell me everything," he said as he accepted the coffee I offered. I did, my voice steady despite the pain squeezing my chest. I showed him the documents, played Caroline's accidental voice message, detailed the subtle campaign they'd been waging. As I spoke, Samuel's expression darkened. By the time I finished, he was already pulling papers from his briefcase. What they're doing has a name, Helen, he said quietly. Elder abuse. Financial exploitation. And it's not just immoral. It's illegal. He explained my options quickly, efficiently. We could file for a protection order. We could challenge any financial decisions they'd made in my name. We could, if I chose, bring criminal charges. But what do you want, Helen? He asked, his eyes kind but serious. These are your daughter and son-in-law, your family. I looked down at my hands that had built this house, raised a child, turned pages for thousands of library patrons, hands that had strength left in them yet. I want my house, I said simply. I want my life back, and I want them to understand that I'm not a problem to be managed or an asset to be liquidated. I'm a person, their mother. Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly what I was asking for. Not vengeance, but dignity. Not punishment, but protection. We worked quickly, creating a new will that explicitly protected the house from being sold without my consent, revoking the financial power of attorney Caroline had obtained, drafting cease and desist letters regarding any discussion of my mental competence without proper medical evaluation. Samuel made calls to my bank, putting immediate holds on all but my personal checking account. By 9:10, we were ready. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and set it at the place across from Samuel. At 9:15, I heard Caroline's footsteps on the stairs, the familiar cadence of her descent, a rhythm I'd known since she was a child. It struck me then how much I still loved her, despite everything. How much. I wished none of this was necessary. The kitchen door swung open. Caroline stepped in, already speaking. Mom, did you remember to take your... She froze, her sentence hanging incomplete in the air between us. Her eyes darted from me in my navy suit to Samuel with his open briefcase, to the documents spread across the table. Mother, what's happening? She whispered, her face paling. I gestured to the chair across from Samuel. Sit down, Caroline. We need to talk. She moved like a sleepwalker, lowering herself into the chair, her eyes never leaving the legal papers. I saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. This is Samuel Carter, I said, my voice calm. You remember him? He handled your father's estate. Caroline nodded mutely. Of course she remembered Samuel. He'd been the one to explain to a tearful 10-year-old girl what it meant that her father had left everything to his wife, that one day when I was gone, it would all be hers. Mr. Carter is here because some concerning issues have come to my attention, I continued. Issues regarding my finances, my medical care, and the legal status of this house. Mom, I don't know what you think is happening, but Samuel slid a document toward her. This is a copy of a power of attorney filing made 3 months ago, he said, his professional tone betraying no emotion. It purports to give you complete control over your mother's financial affairs due to her diminished capacity. The doctor whose signature appears here has confirmed to me this morning that he has never evaluated Mrs. Dawson for cognitive impairment. Caroline's face flushed, then paled again. There must be some mistake. No mistake, I said quietly. Just like there's no mistake about the equity line of credit you took out against my house 6 weeks ago, or the conversations you've been having with Sunset Valley Assisted Living about their most affordable rooms. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. She hadn't known I was aware of those things. Hadn't realized I still checked my mail when she was at work. Still had friends at the bank who called me with concerns. Still had neighbors who reported back when they saw Caroline showing people around my property. Mom, she began again, her voice taking on the slow, patronizing tone she'd adopted recently. You've been confused. You need help managing things. Kevin and I just want what's best. I raised my hand, stopping her. Then I reached for my phone, found the voice message, and pressed play. Once she gets too weak, we'll sell the house. It'll cover the debts and finally give us the life we deserve. She won't even notice. It's not like she can stop us. Caroline's own voice filled the kitchen, echoing off the walls I had painted, the floors I had finished. Her words hung in the air between us, undeniable, unspinnable. The color drained from her face. You weren't meant to hear that, she whispered. Clearly, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice remained despite the fissure in my heart. But I did. And now we're going to talk about what happens next. Caroline sat frozen, her perfect posture crumbling as the reality of the situation sank in. The confident, calculating daughter I'd glimpsed in that audio message was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she looked like what she truly was, A child caught in a terrible act. "I can explain," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sure you can," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "People can explain almost anything if they try hard enough." Samuel cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Dawson has instructed me to outline the steps we're taking effective immediately." His voice was professional, but not unkind. "First, all financial powers of attorney previously granted have been revoked. Second, a formal complaint has been filed with the State Medical Board regarding the falsified competency evaluation. Third, a new will has been executed this morning that places this house in an irrevocable trust." Caroline's eyes widened. "You can't do that." "She already has," Samuel replied simply. I watched my daughter's face as she processed this information. I'd expected anger, perhaps, or the defensive outrage of someone whose plans had been thwarted. What I hadn't expected was the flicker of calculation that passed across her features, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, but unmistakable to a mother who had watched that face for 30 years. She was already looking for a new angle, a different approach. "Mom," she said, her voice softening, eyes suddenly brimming with tears. "I know how this looks, but you have to understand. Kevin and I are drowning. The credit card debt, his medical bills after the accident last year. We're barely keeping our heads above water." The sudden shift to vulnerability caught me off guard. I hadn't known about any medical bills. Kevin had seemed perfectly fine all year. "What accident?" I asked, suspicious but still a mother, still capable of concern. Caroline hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. The car accident, in February. Remember? He hurt his back?" Samuel and I exchanged glances. There had been no accident, no injury, no medical bills. "Caroline," I said quietly, "stop lying to me." The tears in her eyes dried instantly, replaced by something harder, colder. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth? Kevin's business is failing. We owe more than you could imagine. And this house, this ridiculous monument to your eternal devotion to Dad, is worth nearly $500,000. Money that's just, sitting here doing nothing while you stubbornly refuse to downsize or be practical." Each word felt like a physical blow, not just because of their cruelty, but because of how they revealed a stranger sitting across from me, a woman I didn't recognize as the daughter I had raised. "This ridiculous monument," I said slowly, "is the home where you grew up, where your father wanted you to grow up, the home I finished with my own hands so that you would always have a place of security and love." "Oh, spare me the sentimentality," Caroline scoffed. "It's a house, real estate, an asset, and you're using it to control me, just like you've always tried to control me with guilt and obligation." I couldn't help the small gasp that escaped me. Is that truly how she saw our relationship? As a power? Struggle? As manipulation? "I've never tried to control you, Caroline," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've only ever wanted you to be happy." "Then prove it," she challenged, leaning forward. "If you love me, if you want me to be happy, then help us. Sign the house over. Let us sell it and pay off our debts. You can come live with us in a new place, a modern condo with no stairs, no maintenance. It makes perfect sense." For a moment, just a moment, I felt the familiar pull of maternal instinct, the desire to sacrifice, to smooth the way for my child, to put her needs above my own. It was the same instinct that had driven me to work 2 jobs, to build this house, to give Caroline every opportunity I could afford and many I couldn't. But then I remembered her voice on that message, cold, calculating, waiting for me to get too weak. "Caroline," I said carefully, "this isn't about whether I love you. Of course I love you. I will always love you. But love doesn't mean allowing someone to exploit you. And it certainly doesn't mean rewarding dishonesty." She flinched at the word exploit, but recovered quickly. "So that's it? You're cutting me off? Punishing me?" Samuel interjected, his tone still professionally neutral. "Mrs. Dawson isn't cutting you off, Caroline. She's protecting herself. There's a difference." "Stay out of this," Caroline snapped at him before turning back to me. "Mom, think about what you're doing. Think about what this means for our relationship." The threat was implicit but clear. Help us financially, or lose your daughter. I felt a deep, aching sadness settle in my chest. Because in that moment, I realized I had already lost her, or perhaps never had the daughter I thought I did. The Caroline I'd raised would never have tried to intimidate her mother this way, would never have seen me as a resource to be drained rather than a person to be respected. I have thought about it, I said finally. I've thought about little else since I heard that message last night, and here's what I've decided. You and Kevin need to move out. Today. Caroline's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I'll help you find an apartment. I'll even pay the security deposit as a gift. But you cannot stay in this house any longer. Where are we supposed to go on such short notice? She demanded. The same place you told people your apartment was being repaired, I said quietly. Since we both know there was never any flood damage, that was just the excuse to move in here and begin whatever this plan was. The color that flooded her cheeks confirmed my suspicion. Another lie exposed. At that moment, the front door opened and we heard Kevin's voice calling out cheerfully, "Anyone home? I picked up those pastries you like, Caroline." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his golf clothes, a white bakery bag in hand. His smile faltered as he took in the scene. Samuel with his briefcase open, Caroline's flushed face, the documents spread across the table, and me in my navy suit instead of my usual casual wear. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice immediately taking on the concerned, slightly patronizing tone they both used with me lately. "Everything okay, Helen?" "No, Kevin," I replied calmly. "Everything is not okay. Please sit down. There are some things we need to discuss." As Kevin tentatively lowered himself into the chair beside Caroline, Samuel once again played the recording. Kevin's reaction was different from Caroline's. Less shock, more calculation. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for exits. When the recording finished, he attempted a laugh that died in his throat. That's just Caroline blowing off steam," he tried. "You know how it is when you're stressed, Helen. You say things you don't mean." "Do you also forge medical evaluations when you're stressed?" Samuel asked, mildly. "Or make unauthorized withdrawals from your mother-in-law's accounts?" Kevin's facade crumbled instantly. "That was Caroline's idea," he said quickly, ignoring his wife's look of betrayal. "I told her it was going too far, but she insisted you needed help managing." "Stop talking, Kevin," Caroline hissed. But he was already in self-preservation mode. "Look, Helen, I know this seems bad, but we were desperate. My business investments didn't pan out, and we've got creditors calling day and night. Caroline thought since you're getting older and the house is too much for you anyway." "I'm 67, not 97, I interrupted. "And the house is not too much for me. But you and Caroline have become too much for me." I turned to Samuel, suddenly exhausted by the whole confrontation. "Can you explain the rest? I need some air." He nodded understandingly, and I stood. Neither Caroline nor Kevin would meet my eyes as I walked past them to the back door that led to my garden. The garden where Caroline had once played as a child, where we'd planted sunflowers together every spring, where I'd taught her the names of birds and butterflies. As I stepped outside, I heard Samuel begin outlining the legal consequences of their actions. Potential charges of elder financial abuse, fraud, forgery. Their voices rose in protest, then fell to urgent whispers. I tuned them out, focusing instead on the late summer roses David and I had planted decades ago. They still bloomed faithfully every year, outlasting even the memory of his hands in the soil beside mine. They left that afternoon. Not willingly, not gracefully, but they left. Kevin packed in sullen silence while Caroline alternated between tearful pleas and cold accusations. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the walls I had painted, listening to their footsteps overhead as they gathered their belongings. "This isn't over," Caroline said as she carried her last suitcase to the door. She'd changed. Tactics again, her voice now hard and determined. "You're making a terrible mistake." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but it's my mistake to make." Something flickered in her eyes then. Frustration, yes, but beneath it, a reluctant respect. She'd underestimated me, thought me too weak, too sentimental, too trusting to stand up for myself. It was the first honest moment between us in months. After they drove away, the house felt emptier than it had in years. Larger. Mine again. I walked from room to room, reacquainting myself with corners and doorways and windows that had somehow become foreign territory during their stay. In the guest room, they'd left behind small things: a forgotten scarf, a phone charger, a half-empty bottle of Caroline's favorite perfume. The scent caught me off guard. triggering memories of shopping for her prom dress, helping her get ready for her first job interview, hugging her goodbye when she left for college. My daughter, my only child, now a stranger with familiar eyes. I sank onto the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to cry, not the silent tears of the night before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very core of me. I cried. For the daughter I thought I had. For the relationship I'd believed in. For the future I'd imagined where Caroline would sit with me on the porch in my old age, sharing stories and laughter, perhaps with grandchildren playing in the yard. That future was gone now, shattered by the cold calculation in her voice. Once she gets too weak, we'll sell the house. When the tears finally subsided, I felt hollow but strangely peaceful. The worst had happened. The betrayal had been revealed, confronted, addressed. Whatever came next could not possibly hurt more than this. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and began to reclaim my space. I returned the thermostat to my preferred temperature. I put away the health food Caroline had stocked in my pantry and made a grocery list that included all the things she'd declared bad for someone your age: good coffee, real butter, the occasional sweet treat. I turned on the classical music station Kevin had complained was depressing. Small rebellions, small reclamations of self. That evening, Samuel called to check on me. They've been served with formal notices, he informed me. The banks have been alerted. Your accounts are secure. Thank you, Samuel. How are you holding up, Helen? His voice softened with genuine concern. I considered the question seriously. I'm surviving, I said finally. It's not the first time I've had to rebuild. No, he agreed, but it shouldn't have had to be this way. After we hung up, I took my tea out to the porch swing, the same swing where I'd once sat with a 10-year-old Caroline, promising her that the house would someday be hers. The same swing where, years later, I'd rocked her firstborn, a colicky infant who would only settle when moving. I wondered with a pang if I would ever see my grandson again, if Caroline would use him as a weapon, keeping him from the grandmother who had refused to finance her parents' lifestyle. The night was warm, crickets singing in the tall grass beyond. The yard. Fireflies blinked like earthbound stars in the gathering darkness. This land, this house, it wasn't just property. It wasn't just an asset. It was the physical embodiment of love and sacrifice and perseverance. Caroline had forgotten that. Or perhaps she'd never truly understood it in the first place. The next morning, I woke to the unusual sound of my phone ringing. It was Marge Wilson. From next door, her voice hushed with neighborhood gossip. Helen, I don't want to alarm you, but there are people taking photos of your house. I pulled back the curtain to see a woman in a business suit standing on the sidewalk, a camera in hand, a clipboard tucked under one arm. Thanks, Marge, I said. I'll handle it. I dressed quickly and stepped outside. The woman looked startled at my appearance, perhaps expecting the feeble, confused old lady Caroline had described to the community. Can I help you? I asked pleasantly. She recovered her professional demeanor. Good morning. I'm Jennifer Baker from Countryside Realty. I'm just doing a preliminary assessment for Caroline Dawson. She's considering listing this property and wanted some comps. Is she now? I interrupted. My smile, never wavering. That's interesting considering Caroline doesn't own this house. I do. Helen Dawson, the actual homeowner. The woman's expression shifted from confusion to embarrassment. I'm sorry, there must be some misunderstanding. Caroline assured me. Yes, Caroline is very good at assuring people of things that aren't true, I said, still pleasant but firm. But please relay this message to her. This house is not for sale. Not now, not when I get too weak. Not ever, at least not on her terms. And any further attempts to misrepresent herself as the owner will result in legal action. Jennifer Baker hastily gathered her things and retreated to her car, fumbling with her keys in her hurry to escape the awkward situation. It wouldn't be the last such encounter. Over the next week, I turned away 2 more realtors, an appraiser, and someone claiming to be a senior care consultant who had been told I was in need of placement. Each time, I stood my ground firmly, but politely. Each time, I felt my confidence growing, my resolve strengthening. Caroline called the following Sunday, their usual dinner visit time. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, this is childish, her message began, her tone exasperated. We need to talk like adults about this situation. Kevin and I are willing to forgive your overreaction if you're willing to sit down and have a rational conversation about your future. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I called my grandson's other grandmother, Elaine, with whom I'd always had a cordial, if distant, relationship. I'd like to see Tommy this weekend, I said without preamble. I'm concerned Caroline might try to limit my access to him. Elaine was quiet for a moment. Helen, she said finally, what exactly is going on with you and Caroline? She's been telling people some very concerning things. My heart sank. Of course, Caroline would have started her campaign already, spreading the narrative that Mother was unstable, unreasonable, perhaps even dangerous. What kind of things? I asked carefully. That you accused her of trying to steal your house, that you've become paranoid, that you threw her and Kevin out without warning because of some confused idea that they were plotting against you. I took a deep breath. Elaine, I'd like to tell you what actually happened. It's not a pretty story, and it doesn't cast your son or my daughter in a flattering light, but it's the truth. I'm listening, Elaine said, her voice cautious but not dismissive. So I told her everything. The accidental voice message, the forged documents, the planned sale of my home, the fabricated medical evaluations. I kept my tone factual, unemotional, letting the evidence speak for itself rather than coloring it with my hurt and betrayal. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Kevin told me they were helping you manage your affairs because you were becoming forgetful, she finally said, her voice hollow. He said you were grateful for their assistance. The only thing I'm grateful for, I replied quietly, is that I discovered the truth before it was too late. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear Elaine recalibrating her understanding of her son, weighing my story against what she knew, or thought she knew, about Kevin. I've noticed things, she admitted finally. Expensive new golf clubs, Caroline's designer handbags, dinners at restaurants I can't afford on my pension. I asked Kevin how they were managing it all with his business struggling, and he just said they were making it work. She paused. I never imagined they were making it work at your expense. Neither did I said simply. Tommy adores you, Elaine continued after a moment. He was asking for Gamma Helen just yesterday. Caroline told him you were sick and couldn't have visitors. A fresh pain stabbed through my heart. Using my grandson as a pawn, that was a cruelty I hadn't anticipated, even after everything else. I'm not sick, I said, working to keep my voice steady, and I miss him terribly. I'll bring him over tomorrow, Elaine decided, a new firmness in her tone. Caroline drops him with me on Thursdays while she has her hair done. We'll come around 11 if that suits you. That would be perfect, I said, relief washing over me. At least one bridge remained intact in the smoldering landscape of my family relationships. Thank you, Elaine. Don't thank me, she replied. What they're doing isn't right, and I won't be part of it. After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy, the wound was still too fresh, too deep for happiness, but less alone. Less as though I were the only one who could see the truth of the situation. True to her word, Elaine arrived next day with Tommy in tow. At 4 years old, he was all energy and curiosity, his face lighting up when he saw me waiting on the porch. Gamma Helen, he shouted, breaking free from Elaine's hand and racing up the steps. Mommy said you were sick. Are you all better now? I knelt to his level, gathering him into a hug that nearly brought tears to my eyes. I was never sick, sweetheart. Just a little sad. Why were you sad? He asked, pulling back to study my face with the direct intensity only children can manage. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, I explained carefully, and that can make everyone feel sad for a while. He considered this, his little brow furrowed in concentration, like when Daddy gets mad at Mommy about the credit cards. Out of the mouths of babes. I exchanged glances with Elaine, whose expression had tightened at this innocent revelation. Something like that, I agreed. But you know what would make me feel much better? Showing you the new bird feeder I put up in the garden? I've been getting the most beautiful blue jays. Tommy's attention instantly shifted, distracted by the promise of birds and the outdoors, and the moment passed. We spent a wonderful morning together, Tommy's laughter filling the spaces in my home that had felt so empty since Caroline and Kevin's departure. I taught him to make sugar cookies, the same recipe I'd taught Caroline when she was small, and delighted in his serious concentration as he cut out shapes with the same cookie cutters his mother had once used. It was a perfect day, until Caroline arrived unexpectedly at 2 o'clock, her face a thundercloud. What is this? She demanded from the doorway, taking in the scene of Tommy, Elaine, and me at the kitchen table, surrounded by decorated cookies and cups of milk. Mom, you had no right to go behind my back like this. Tommy's face fell at his mother's angry tone. Mommy, I made cookies with Gamma Helen. Look, this one's a dinosaur. Caroline didn't even glance at the cookie he held up proudly. Get your things, Tommy. We're leaving. But Mommy? Now, Tommy! Elaine stood up, her expression stern in a way I'd never seen before. Caroline, there's no need for this. Helen was just spending time with her grandson, which she has every right to do. This isn't about rights, Caroline snapped. This is about her undermining my, authority as a parent, going around me to arrange visits when she knows perfectly well we're in the middle of a serious disagreement. A disagreement? I echoed, incredulous. Is that what you call trying to take my house and life savings? A disagreement? Tommy's eyes widened, darting between us adults, sensing the tension, though not understanding its source. Not in front of Tommy, Elaine said, firmly. Caroline, why don't you and I step outside to discuss this? There's nothing to discuss, Caroline insisted. Tommy, come here right now. My grandson looked at me with confusion and the beginnings of tears. I knelt down to his level again, mustering a smile I didn't feel. It's okay, sweetheart, I assured him. Go with your mommy now, and we'll finish our cookies another day. He nodded reluctantly and slid off his chair, trudging over to Caroline with none of the bouncing energy he'd shown earlier. As she took his hand and turned to leave, she fixed me with a cold stare. Don't try this again, she warned. If you want to see Tommy, you go through me. And right now, I'm not feeling particularly inclined to allow visitation to someone who's been spreading lies about his, parents. The only person spreading lies here is you, Caroline, Elaine interjected, her voice steady but hard. I've heard Helen's side of the story, and I've seen enough evidence to believe her. If anyone should be reconsidering visitation rights, perhaps it should be me. Caroline's face paled. You can't be serious. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of truth and decency, Elaine replied. And right now, Helen seems to be the only one standing on that ground. Caroline's mouth opened and closed without sound, as if she couldn't quite process this development. Then, without another word, she turned and left, pulling a confused Tommy along with her. I'm so sorry, Elaine said when the door closed behind them. I had no idea she would show up like that. It's not your fault, I assured her, though my heart was breaking all over again at the thought of Tommy being dragged into this ugly situation. Thank you for standing up for me. It's the least I could do, she replied, gathering her purse. And Helen, this isn't over. Kevin and Caroline may think they can isolate you, turn people against you, but they're wrong. I won't let them do to you what they tried to. Do to my late husband. I blinked in surprise. Your husband? What do you mean? Elaine's expression grew somber. Kevin's father had a small inheritance from his parents. Nothing substantial, about $30,000. But he'd earmarked it for Kevin's college education. When he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, Kevin somehow convinced him to sign it over. Said he needed it for business startup costs. My husband was already showing symptoms, easily confused. By the time I found out, it was too late. The money was gone, and Kevin's promised business never materialized. I felt sick. I had no idea. Why would you? They're very good at presenting the image they want people to see. Elaine sighed. I hoped, that Kevin had learned his lesson after that he wouldn't try something similar again. Clearly, I was wrong. After she left, I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by the cheerful mess of our cookie making. The dinosaur cookie Tommy had been so proud of lay abandoned on a napkin, half its frosting tail broken off in his haste to obey his mother. I should have been angry. Should have been outraged at Caroline's behavior, at this fresh evidence of Kevin's predatory nature. Instead, I felt only a profound sadness, not just for myself, but for all of us. For Caroline, who had somehow become a woman willing to exploit her own mother. For Kevin, who saw family as resources rather than relationships. For Tommy, caught in the middle of adult greed and deceit. Even for Elaine, carrying the weight of her son's moral failures. What a tangled web we had all become ensnared in, I thought, carefully wrapping Tommy's broken dinosaur cookie in plastic. I would save it for his next visit, whenever that might be. The news spread quickly through our close-knit neighborhood. I hadn't intended it to. Had wanted, in fact, to keep the ugly truth private, a family matter between Caroline, Kevin, and me. But Columbus was a smaller town then. It sometimes appeared, and people talked. It started with Marge Wilson, who had seen the realtors coming and going, who had witnessed Caroline's angry arrival and departure with Tommy. She mentioned it to Arthur Jenkins at the hardware store, who had heard from his wife, who worked at the bank, that there had been some trouble with my accounts. Arthur told Robert Foster at the library board meeting, and Robert, who had always been sweet on me since David died, came straight to my door with a casserole and concerned questions. "I'm fine, Robert," I assured him, accepting the casserole with as much grace as I could muster. Just a family misunderstanding that got out of hand. But Robert had known me for decades, had seen me raise Caroline, build this house, weather widowhood with quiet dignity. "Helen," he said gently, "if someone is taking advantage of you, that's not a misunderstanding. That's abuse. And this community looks after its own." I'd almost laughed at the word abuse. It seemed too strong, too violent a term for what had happened. Abuse was bruises and broken bones, wasn't it? Not falsified documents and secret plans to sell a house. But as the days passed, I began to understand that Robert was right. What Caroline and Kevin had attempted was a form of abuse. Emotional, financial, psychological. They had tried to make me doubt my own competence, had isolated me from friends and neighbors, had planned to take everything I'd worked for without my consent. The revelation came gradually, not in a flash of insight, but in small moments of clarity, when I found myself hesitating over simple decisions, second-guessing my own judgment, when I flinched at unexpected phone calls, bracing for Caroline's anger, when I realized I'd stopped inviting friends over because Caroline had convinced me it was too much trouble at your age. These were the fingerprints of their manipulation, subtle but unmistakable. A week after the confrontation, I received a call from an unexpected source, Dr. Michael Lebowitz, my longtime physician. "Helen," he said without preamble, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Your daughter contacted me several times over the past few months, expressing concerns about your cognitive function. She requested tests, evaluations. She was very persuasive about your supposed symptoms." My stomach clenched. And I should have insisted on seeing you directly instead of taking her word for it, he admitted. "I'm calling because I received paperwork supposedly signed by me, diagnosing you with moderate dementia. I never signed such documents, Helen. Never even evaluated you for cognitive impairment." I closed my eyes, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Caroline forged your signature." "It appears so," he confirmed grimly. "I've already filed a report with the medical board and contacted your attorney, Mr. Carter. But I wanted to speak with you personally. This type of elder exploitation is, well, unfortunately, I've seen it before, and I'm deeply sorry I didn't catch the warning signs in this case." "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and for doing the right thing now." After we hung up, I sat in my armchair for a long while, processing this new information. Caroline hadn't just lied to me. She'd created an elaborate fiction about my mental state, enlisted medical professionals, created fraudulent documents. The depth of the deception was staggering. I was still sitting there when the doorbell rang. Half expecting another concerned neighbor with a casserole, I was surprised to find Pastor Williams on my porch, his kind face creased with worry. "Helen," he greeted me warmly. "I hope you don't mind my stopping by unannounced. May I come in?" I'd known Pastor Williams for over 20 years. He'd officiated at David's funeral, had baptized Tommy, had been a steady, compassionate presence through many of life's challenges. "Of course," I said, stepping back to let him enter. "Can I offer you some tea?" "That would be lovely." As I busied myself in the kitchen, I wondered what had brought him here. Had Caroline been spreading her version of events at church? Was he here to counsel me toward reconciliation, toward forgiveness? The thought made my hands shake slightly as I set the teacups on a tray. Wasn't ready for that conversation. Wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. But when we settled in the living room, Pastor Williams surprised me. "Helen, I want to be direct with you," he began. "Caroline came to see me yesterday. She told me you've been experiencing confusion, that you've made accusations against her and Kevin, that you've become paranoid and difficult." I felt my shoulders tense, preparing for what would come next. Gentle suggestions that I seek help, perhaps, or spiritual guidance on accepting my declining years with grace. "And I didn't believe a word of it," he continued, his voice firm. "Not because I doubted her sincerity in the moment. I think Caroline has convinced herself of certain narratives, but because I've known you too long and too well to accept such claims." Without question, relief washed over me. "Thank you," I said simply. "You don't need to thank me for seeing what's plainly visible," he replied. "You are one of the most clear-headed, practical, and honest people in our congregation. The idea that you would suddenly become paranoid or confused, without any prior symptoms, without any medical basis, strikes me as highly improbable. He sipped his tea, thoughtfully, before continuing. I'm here because I'm concerned. Not about your mental state, but about your heart. This kind of betrayal by a loved one leaves deep wounds. The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. I'd been holding myself together so carefully, presenting a strong, capable face to the world to counter Caroline's narrative of confusion and decline. But here, with this gentle man, who had known me through joy and grief, the carefully constructed facade began to crack. I trusted her, I whispered, my voice breaking on the last word. I gave her everything I had to give, my love, my support, my savings when they needed it. I would have given her this house freely when the time was right. All she had to do was wait, was treat me with basic human dignity. Instead, I couldn't finish, tears clogging my throat. Pastor Williams reached across and took my hand in his weathered one. Instead, she tried to take what wasn't yet hers to have. She prioritized material gain over relationship. And that, Helen, is her tragedy, not yours. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes as I regained my composure. Outside, the late summer sunlight filtered through the maple trees David and I had planted when we first built the house. What happens now? I asked finally. Between Caroline and me? Pastor Williams considered the question with the careful attention it deserved. That depends on many things. On whether Caroline recognizes the gravity of what she's done, on whether she's truly repentant or merely sorry she was caught, on what justice requires in this situation. He paused. And of course, on what you're willing to forgive. I don't know if I can forgive this, I admitted. Does that make me a bad person? A bad mother? A bad Christian? No, he said firmly. It makes you human. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process, often a long and painful one. And true forgiveness can't begin until the harm stops and is acknowledged. Caroline is still causing harm, still denying her actions, still spreading falsehoods about you. You can't rush to forgiveness while you're still actively being wounded. His words released something in me, a burden of guilt I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The expectation that I should immediately forgive, should put this behind us, should prioritize family harmony above all else. Thank you, I said again, meaning it more deeply this time, for not pressuring me to reconcile before I'm ready, for not making me feel that my hurt is less important than maintaining the appearance of family unity. The appearance of unity without the substance of trust is just another deception, Pastor Williams said gently. And I think you've had enough deception in your life lately, don't you? After he left, I felt stronger somehow, more centered. Not healed, that would take far more time, but better equipped to face whatever came next. And something told me there was much more to come. 3 months passed. Autumn painted the trees around my house in brilliant golds and crimsons, then stripped them bare as winter approached. I settled into a new rhythm, a new normal that felt both strange and familiar, like returning to a childhood home after decades away. Without Caroline and Kevin's constant presence, I rediscovered parts of myself that had been gradually erased. My preference for early mornings with classical music, my enjoyment of spicy foods they'd deemed too harsh for someone your age, my love of long walks through the neighborhood at dusk. Samuel continued to handle the legal aspects of the situation. The formal complaint against Dr. Lebowitz had been dismissed once it became clear he hadn't signed the falsified documents. Instead, a fraud investigation had been opened regarding the forged signatures. Caroline and Kevin had hired their own lawyer, an aggressive young man named James Holden, who sent threatening letters filled with legal jargon that Samuel assured me was more bluster than substance. They don't have a leg to stand on legally, he told me during one of our regular check-ins, but they seem determined to drag this out, possibly hoping you'll get tired and settle just to have peace. They don't know me very well if they think that's my breaking point, I replied with a wry smile. I built this house beam by beam, Samuel. I can outlast a paper storm. My relationship with Tommy remained complicated. Caroline had officially barred me from seeing him, a petty cruelty that hurt more than anything else she'd done. But Elaine continued to bring him for secret visits when she could manage it. These clandestine afternoons became precious islands of joy in an otherwise turbulent sea. Tommy didn't understand the adult conflicts swirling around him. He only knew that his Gamma Helen always had cookies, stories, and unlimited patience for his endless why questions. It was during one of these visits, on a crisp November afternoon, that everything changed. Tommy and I were in the kitchen making apple turnovers, his latest culinary interest, when the phone rang. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered, expecting perhaps Robert with another invitation to the library fundraiser or Pastor Williams checking in as he did every week. Instead, I heard Kevin's voice, uncharacteristically subdued. "Helen, it's Kevin. I need to talk to you." My first instinct was to hang up. After all the legal threats, the whisper campaigns, the attempts to paint me as mentally unstable, I had no interest in whatever Kevin might have to say. But something in his tone made me pause. "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "Not over the phone," he replied. "In person. Just you and me. No lawyers, no Caroline. There are things you need to know." "Why would I agree to that, Kevin? So you can record our conversation and twist my words later? Create more evidence of my supposed confusion?" He sighed heavily. "I deserve that. But this isn't a trick, Helen. I'm trying to do the right thing for once." I glanced at Tommy, happily crimping the edges of a turnover with a fork, blissfully unaware of who was on the phone. "When?" I asked, still skeptical but curious despite myself. "Tomorrow? Noon? The coffee shop on Main? Public place, neutral ground." I considered for a moment. "Fine. Noon tomorrow. But if this is some kind of setup—" "It's not," he interrupted. "Thank you, Helen. I know you have no reason to trust me, but thank you." After hanging up, I immediately called Samuel to inform him of the meeting. "I don't think you should go alone," he advised, concern evident in his voice. "I won't be alone," I assured him. "It's a public place, and I need to hear what he has to say." The next day I arrived at the coffee shop, 10 minutes early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. I ordered a cappuccino and waited, trying to quell the nervous flutter in my stomach. What could Kevin possibly want to tell me that required such secrecy? He arrived precisely at noon, looking nothing like the confident, polished man I'd known for years. His expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame, as if he'd lost weight rapidly. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually impeccable hair was disheveled. He spotted me immediately but hesitated at the door, as if gathering courage, before finally approaching. "Helen," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you for coming." I nodded but didn't offer any warmth. "You said you had something to tell me." He sat down, fidgeting with a napkin. "I do. But first, can I get you another coffee or something to eat?" "I'm fine," I replied. "Please get to the point, Kevin." He took a deep breath. "I'm leaving Caroline. The divorce papers were filed yesterday." Of all the things I'd imagined he might say, this hadn't even made the list. "I don't see how that concerns me," I said after a moment of stunned silence. "It concerns you. Because I'm also going to the police," he continued, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper, "to confess my role in everything, the forged documents, the unauthorized bank withdrawals, all of it." I stared at him, trying to make sense of this unexpected turn. "Why? Why now?" Kevin looked down at his hands. "Because I can't live with it anymore. With any of it. The lies, the manipulation, the constant pressure to find more money, bigger schemes." He paused. "Caroline isn't the person I thought I married. Or maybe she is, and I just didn't want to see it. That doesn't explain why you're telling me this," I pointed out, "or why you're leaving her now, after standing by her through everything else." He met my eyes then, and I was surprised to see what looked like genuine remorse. 2 reasons. First, because you deserve to know the truth, that most of it was her idea. The plan to have you declared incompetent, the forged medical evaluations, the realtors, Caroline orchestrated all of it. I went along because our finances were a mess, because I was weak, because I convinced myself you wouldn't really be hurt. He trailed off, looking ashamed. "I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm not. But you should know where it came from." I digested this information slowly. It hurt but didn't surprise me. I'd seen the calculation in Caroline's eyes that morning in the kitchen, had recognized a coldness that went beyond desperation. "And the second reason?" I prompted. Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded sheet of paper, which he placed carefully on the table. "Between us. Because I found this yesterday, in Caroline's desk drawer." I unfolded the paper cautiously. It was an insurance policy. On my life. Taken out 6 months earlier, with Caroline as the sole beneficiary. For $1 million. My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. The amount was far more than could be justified for final expenses or outstanding debts. The timing coincided. precisely with their move into my house. She took this out right after the flood in your apartment, I said quietly. Kevin nodded. An apartment that never flooded. We were evicted because Caroline hadn't paid the rent in 3 months. She was using the money for online shopping, credit card payments. When I found out, she convinced me moving in with you was the perfect solution. Said you needed help anyway, that we'd be doing you a favor. He rubbed his face wearily. I knew about the plan to eventually sell the house. That was bad enough. But this? He gestured at the insurance policy. This terrifies me, especially after what I overheard last week. What did you hear? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Caroline on the phone with someone, I don't know who, talking about how certain medications can mimic the symptoms of a stroke, how they're virtually undetectable if administered correctly. His voice broke. That's when I knew I had to get out. Had to stop this before it went any further. I sat back, feeling as though the air had been knocked from my lungs. I'd known Caroline had become calculating, had become fixated on my house and assets. But this suggested something far darker, a willingness to consider the unthinkable. Have you shown this to the police? I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil inside. Not yet. I wanted you to see it first, to understand why I'm doing this. Kevin hesitated, then added, She's not well, Helen. I don't know if it's greed or something deeper, but she needs help, professional help. I nodded, slowly, processing. I appreciate you telling me this, Kevin, but why should I believe you now, after months of lies? He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small digital recorder. Because I've been gathering evidence for weeks. Conversations where she discusses the plans, the forgeries, everything. I'll give it all to the police, testify if necessary. I know it doesn't make up for what we did, but maybe it can help protect you going forward. As I walked home from that meeting, the insurance policy and a copy of Kevin's recordings in my purse, I felt strangely calm. The revelation should have devastated me, learning that my own daughter had contemplated something so unthinkable. Instead, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, the last illusion stripped away. Caroline wasn't just greedy or financially desperate. There was something fundamentally broken in her moral compass, something that went beyond normal human frailty. That night, I made 2 calls. The first was to Samuel, relaying everything Kevin had told me, forwarding copies of the evidence. The second was to Pastor Williams. I need to ask you something, I said when he answered. About forgiveness. Go ahead, he replied, his voice warm with concern. Is there a difference between forgiving someone and allowing them to remain in your life? He was quiet for a moment, considering. Absolutely, he said finally. Forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. It doesn't require reconciliation, especially when the other person remains dangerous or unrepentant. That's what I needed to hear, I said softly, because I think I'm ready to forgive Caroline, not for her sake, but for mine. But I can't have her in my life anymore, not after what I learned today. That's an incredibly wise and brave position, Helen, Pastor Williams said, and completely consistent with both self-respect and spiritual health. I slept peacefully that night for the first time in months. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Samuel arrived early with a police detective who took formal statements regarding the insurance policy and Kevin's recordings. By afternoon, Caroline had been called in for questioning. By evening, she had been arrested on multiple charges: forgery, fraud, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, and, most seriously, conspiracy to commit murder. I didn't go to the arraignment. Didn't want to see my daughter in handcuffs. Didn't need to witness her face when bail was denied due to the severity of the charges and the evidence against her. Samuel attended in my place, reporting back that Caroline had appeared shocked that Kevin had turned on her, that the careful house of cards she'd constructed had collapsed so completely. Kevin, in exchange for his cooperation, received a plea deal with minimal jail time. He moved away afterward, to Arizona, I heard, starting fresh with whatever fragments of his life remained. I never saw him again, though he sent a letter once, a year later, thanking me for the kindness I'd shown Tommy and expressing what seemed like genuine remorse for his role in everything that had happened. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Caroline eventually accepted a plea deal of her own, receiving a 10-year sentence with possibility of parole after 5 years. I wrote a victim impact statement for the court, but chose not to deliver it in person. Some wounds were still too raw, some betrayals too profound to face directly. Throughout this period, the community I'd feared might believe Caroline's lies about my mental state instead rallied around me with unexpected fervor. Neighbors took turns bringing meals, driving me to appointments, helping with yard work. The library board, led by Robert, established a senior advocacy program in my name. Pastor Williams organized a support group for older adults who had experienced family exploitation, a group that, sadly, grew larger each month as more people found the courage to share their stories. But the greatest joy came from my restored relationship with Tommy. Once Caroline was incarcerated and Kevin had relocated, Elaine petitioned for and received primary custody of our grandson. She made sure I was part of his life, bringing him for weekly visits, including me in school events and holiday celebrations. Together, we created a stable, loving environment for a child whose world had been upended by adult failings. Tommy, resilient as only children can be, adjusted gradually. He asked about his mother sometimes, his questions becoming more complex as he grew older. I never lied to him, but I measured my responses carefully, focusing on Caroline's positive qualities when I could, acknowledging that she had made terrible mistakes but was still his mother, still deserving of basic human respect. "Will she ever come live with us again?" he asked once when he was 7. "No, sweetheart," I answered honestly. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you in her way. Do you still love her?" He persisted, with that piercing insight children sometimes display. I considered the question carefully. "I love the daughter I raised," I said finally. "I love the memory of her childhood, her accomplishments, her better moments. I love the part of her that lives in you. Your smile, your creativity, your determination. But the woman she became, I've had to let that love go, not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with an answer that acknowledged complexity rather than offering false simplicity. As for the house, the beautiful, hard-won house that had been the catalyst for so much pain, it remained mine, but with a new purpose. 3 years after Caroline's sentencing, I converted the lower level into a small apartment and opened my home to Janet, a widow from church who had been struggling with rising rents. She brought companionship, shared expenses, and an extra pair of eyes on Tommy when he visited. We were not quite roommates, not quite family, but something uniquely valuable that defied simple categorization. On my 70th birthday, a milestone I celebrated with a garden party attended by friends, neighbors, and a now 8-year-old Tommy, I finalized the arrangements for the house's future. It would go into a trust upon my death, with provisions for Tommy's college education and a requirement that it be sold to a family with limited means at below market value. Caroline would receive nothing directly, though I arranged for a modest monthly stipend should she demonstrate genuine rehabilitation after serving her sentence. "Are you sure about this?" Samuel asked as we reviewed the documents one final time. "It's very generous, considering everything." "I'm sure," I replied. "This isn't about Caroline anymore. It's about reclaiming the purpose of this house, to provide security, to foster growth, to build future generations. David would have wanted that." Samuel nodded, understanding. "You've turned something tragic into something meaningful, Helen. Not many people could do that." 5 years have passed since that birthday. Tommy is 13 now, lanky and thoughtful with his grandfather David's gentle eyes and determined chin. He stays with me every other weekend, filling the house with the sounds of video games and homework complaints and teenage laughter. Elaine comes for Sunday dinners, bringing her new husband George, a kind man who treats Tommy like his own grandson. Caroline was released on parole last year. Our reunion, arranged through her parole officer and supervised by Pastor Williams, was stilted but civil. She looked older, subdued, her once perfect appearance now marked by prison pallor and institutional haircuts. She spoke of therapy programs, of finally understanding the depths of her actions, of wanting to make amends. I listened politely, neither accepting nor rejecting her overtures. Time would tell whether her remorse was genuine or merely another calculation. I had promised myself years ago that I would remain open to possible reconciliation, but would never again mistake words for character, promises for actions. For now, we maintain limited contact, monthly phone calls, the occasional supervised visit. She has met Tommy a handful of times since her release, these encounters carefully orchestrated to protect his emotional well-being while acknowledging his natural curiosity about the mother he barely remembers. As for me, I've found an unexpected peace in these later years. The betrayal that once threatened to consume me has instead refined me, stripped away false securities and illusions, leaving behind something more authentic and resilient than before. I garden still, volunteer at the library's senior programs, host weekly card games for the neighborhood widows and widowers. I live fully in a house built twice, once with David's dreams, once with my own hands, and now sustained by my reclaimed sense of purpose. This morning, I sat on the porch swing where Caroline and I once talked of legacy, where I once rocked Tommy as an infant, where David and I once planned our future. A light snow was falling, the first of the season, dusting the yard with diamond brilliance. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of coffee and watched the world transform, minute by minute, into something new and beautiful. The house stood solid around me, its walls still straight, its foundation still firm after all these decades. Like me, it had weathered storms, endured threats, remained standing when forces both external and intimate had tried to claim it for their own purposes. Some might call it just property, wood and nails and concrete, an asset with market value. But I know better. This house is the physical manifestation of resilience, of boundaries respected, of dignity reclaimed. It stands as testimony to a truth I learned at great personal cost, but now hold with absolute certainty. Our worth isn't measured by what others can take from us, but by what we refuse to surrender. Our legacy isn't in what we leave behind, but in how we live each day with integrity, even when, especially when, those closest to us fail to do the same. And sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't blind, forgiveness or endless sacrifice, but the quiet courage to say, this far and no further. This is my house. This is my life. Both built with my own hands, both worth defending, both finally, completely mine.